So, welcome to night 3 of the Real Matter workshop series. We're super thankful that you came out and invested Wednesday night to hang out with us. I have the pleasure of kicking off tonight and being in front of a mic, which is my second to least favorite thing ever. But I'm going to try to get through this because I think it's really important to acknowledge a few folks that make this possible. So, first off, I want to make sure I mention our co-sponsor, Myriad Media. Drew's running sound and video in the back, and so we couldn't do that without them. I also want to make sure I name a couple of organizing sponsors, folks that have invested time to be on reviews and lots of money to make sure that folks like David are able to come here, be here in person, be able to converse with us, talk about our city, talk about how we could kind of reimagine what if for the future. So those organizing sponsors, I got my notes because I do not want to forget anybody, are Raleigh Architecture and Construction Companies. I saw Craig somewhere. Craig can wave. Yeah, thank you, Craig. And then also Mainland Creative. They've been our marketing and graphic support in the background. So a lot of the pushing that you see for the website and for some of the graphics is all thanks to them. So we really appreciate their support. Also want to thank specifically a group of 16 folks that we make sit in the front and embarrass every night of the workshop because we think it's really important to acknowledge the sacrifice and intensity of showing up. So if my 16 workshop folks could stand up. These folks have traveled from all over to be here to work on projects in our city and make a difference. So we're really thankful for you. That can't go without saying. They are working out of the local Hanbury office, which is right next door. It's a beautiful space, and it's been given to them as a base for operations for the 2 weeks. So what a amazing offering and tactical strike in our city. So thank you, Hanbury. With that, I'm going to be quiet and pass it off to one of the most confusing sequences of introductions that you could ever imagine. So I would like to offer the stage up to tonight's lecture sponsor, which is the NC State School of Architecture. This is David Hill.
Got to bring the microphone down a little bit. Thank you all for coming. Welcome to Real Matter. Another year of this. This is incredible. For those of you who don't know me, I see a lot of students, former students, colleagues. Some of you do know me, the real David Hill. But for those of you who don't know me, I'm David Hill, head of the School of Architecture at NC State University. And if I look a little confused right now, it's because up until about 5 minutes ago, I thought I was giving the lecture tonight. And apparently there's more than one David Hill out there in design. I'm a David Hill, but the David Hill is here. He's behind that curtain, and he's going to join us in just a minute. But for the 2 or 3 of you that sent me encouraging emails and texts about tonight, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. But you're getting ready to sit through a talk by some rando David Hill, right? But here's the thing. So despite our parents' apparent lack of creativity in the baby naming department, his middle name is Matthew, and mine is Brian with an I. Come on, parents, how are you going to stand out with names like that? The real David Hill is speaking tonight. He's an uncommonly talented designer. He's an inspiring educator and a truly extraordinary person. He's also much taller than I am. You'll see that in a minute. And before I properly introduce him, let me take a moment. I want to acknowledge the Real Matter students, as Zach just did, who shared excellent presentations this morning. I was delighted to see NC State students, but also students from across the country coming here to Raleigh. So welcome to all of you. I also want to thank the entire in situ team, Matt, Zach, Joao, Alyssa, Kelly, Jeremy, and Fabiola, for once again creating both a fabulous student program and this vital public lecture series that demonstrates the importance of thoughtful design in our community. Cheers to you all. Big round of applause for them. Okay, so about this other David Hill. Born and raised in a plant nursery in South Georgia, he was preordained to be a landscape architect. He developed an early and deep affinity for plants in the rich working landscapes of the South, a foundation that continues to shape his approach to design today. David brings a unique perspective that bridges education and practice as both a registered architect and landscape architect, founder of HILLWORKS, and professor in landscape architecture program at Auburn University. His path has taken him from Georgia Tech, where he studied architecture, to the University of Virginia for a dual master's degree in landscape architecture and architecture. But perhaps most formatively, David spent 15 years helping to unearth post-industrial landscapes at Dirt Studio, where he was a principal managing transformative projects like the Urban Outfitters headquarters at the Philadelphia Naval Yard, Hardbarger Park in San Antonio, the historic Pabst Brewery in Milwaukee, and the Holy Cross Project in New Orleans. This rich experience with cultural and productive landscapes drives how David uncovers site histories and explores design opportunities, work that has earned him both national and regional recognition through Dirt and HILLWORKS. I've had the pleasure of knowing David for a few years now and was fortunate to catch up with him last night, and I'm delighted to welcome him to Raleigh and ask him to join us now at the podium. Welcome, David.
We're the same height. Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me here. Thanks in situ team. Thanks for the conversations with the workshop students today. It was really fantastic. All right, I'm going to try to talk right into this mic. Is that good? All right, great. Look, I don't like these things, to be honest with you. I'd much rather have a dialogue, a conversation. So I'd love it if somebody interrupted me at any point with a question or, throw a bullshit flag or something if you don't think what I'm saying is appropriate or you just don't believe it. Please, let's have a pretty good open dialogue. I'm going to get through a couple of slides here. But we're here to hopefully talk about time. Today we were talking about, we talk a lot about space and order, form. We as architects, we really like shape. We like design. We like, sequencing spaces. But we don't talk enough, in my opinion, about time. And we get this, when we talk about time, we're talking about change. And as you all know, change is happening in some crazy rates. It has been happening forever, but we are dialing in a little bit more nuance about how the speed of change or the severity of change is happening. And so today, as we were talking in the workshop earlier, I want to kind of back up and try to unpack the opportunities of time, the richness of time, the thickness of time, and see how we as a team, thanks for letting me be on your team, can start to look at this next week and a half and see the lens of Raleigh and the lens of your proposals through this idea of nuanced and refined time. Right, so that's really the goal of the project, the goal of the presentation today, is really use our work. We've been trying to identify opportunities and interests in time and in change, and it's something that landscape is really good at engaging, and it's something I think it really could start to tie people to a place in a much more meaningful way. So that's the goal. We're going to talk about three types of time, three lenses: seasonal time, regenerative time, and storied time. So I'll jump right in. Again, interrupt at any point. So first, seasonal time. I'd say, as you know, seasons happen. As this diagram starts to depict, plants change through the seasons. You can see in the bottom row that plants, perennials die off. They put all their energy in the root system. They're not very visible through the winter. Then they start to emerge in the spring. There's this richness that's happening in the world all around us in plants. We often are kind of not so tuned to it anymore. Back in 1782, you can see Thomas Jefferson writing notes about how plants are changing through the seasons. You can see the nasturtium stopping blooming in September. You can start to see the hollyhock starting to bloom on the 25th of June, right? This is showing evidence that humans were paying really careful attention to changes in the season, paying really careful attention to plants, right? They know when the swallowtails arrive and the nectar's not there, that's a bit of an issue. So the more we can get people engaged with the spatial result of seasonal time, I think the better off we'll be as observers and as critics of our world around us, right? So this project that we're going to look at, this is a little precursor here, is a series of photographs that we've been taking for years of the same species every week for through the seasons to try to understand. I'm going to go back one, try to understand the opacity, the transparency, the texture, the color of, in this particular case, it's a American beech, which is a deciduous tree. But what's really fantastic about an American beech is that they hold their leaves through the winter. Not many deciduous trees do that. So there's some fantastic trees that do weird things. This is one of them. And so you can see the top row, that's in the early winter, where these kind of paper brown leaves are being held. And as you walk through the forest, when that's happening, the wind blows and it sounds like rustling of paper, right? It's a pretty fantastic experience. And then there's this moment about 2 weeks in the year where the spring leaves push off those old leaves from the last year, right? If you're moving around the forest in that moment, there's a silence in the forest because you don't have those rustling of leaves anymore. They're on the ground. They're often wet. There's only about 2 weeks of that happens before the light green, the kind of candy green of the new fleshy leaves appear. That's fantastic. What an amazing thing to be working with. And if we continue to observe these species more carefully, we can start to use that in the design and really start to build a spatial language around that, right? So the first project that we're going to go through, we're going to just go through 3 projects. The first one is called the Gravel Garden, and it's engaging this recurring seasonal time. So it's quite simple. It's a design, it's a fairly small scale landscape. We call it the Gravel Garden because it's a ground plane that's designed both fully for planted form, fully every surface of the gravel can allow plants to emerge through it. So it's good quality soil. The soil is a living system. It's got lots of organic in it. But it's also walkable. You can walk across that gravel at any point. So you're not defining spaces through paths and edges. You're not defining spaces through, solid, unplantable surfaces versus plantable surfaces. Everything's a little bit of both. And then within that form, so you start to see the gravel here. Within that surface, that really dynamic surface, we started a 14-inch on-center grid that starts to create space as these plants start to emerge. So essentially what we did was first carve out 14-inch grid and then seed at each of those points. And then as the seeds start to grow up, they create rooms, and you can start to see a room here, a path, a space for gathering. I won't do that anymore. I'll stay right here. All right. So here's the stakes. It's trying to, delineate these 14-inch grids. And then early in the spring, these annuals. And I should have mentioned that these are really fast-growing annuals that won't come back. They'll self-seed, but they're not perennials, which means they invest back in their roots, they're investing in seed heads that then distribute and show up somewhere else. So you can start to see the grid starting to emerge. You can see a little bit in shade and shadow, rooms starting to be defined. So again, trying to take this idea of phenology and stretch it to see how much can we take this seasonal time. I just said the word phenology, but I'm not sure I mentioned what that was yet. Have I? No. All right, so phenology is simply the study of seasons. And so there's a lot of climatologists interested in phenology, a lot of entomologists interested in phenology. It's just measuring when things emerge, the phenophase of a species. And so I tried to say seasonality every time so I didn't have to define that, but I forgot. Sorry about that. So the season of this garden is starting to not just be about the life cycle of a plant, but it's also about space generation and space creation and definition, right? A little bit later in the season, still spring, you can start to see the flowers emerge, which brings a tremendous amount of color. Not quite seed heads starting to show up yet, but the flowers are emerging. At this point, you could still move through the grid pretty loosely and fluidly. Eventually, that grid starts to thicken up, and so what was a fairly open-ended landscape is now fairly defined, and the species are starting to intertwine with one another. So that 14 inches was a little bit of a calibration. How wide will these species get before they start to weave? You can start to see the spaces form. There's two major spaces in a path. Here we are in August, and something magical started to happen in the fall where the greens and the kind of brilliant lime green started to fade, and we start to see dark green, some yellows, some chocolates are starting to pull in. And then what was a bit surprising to us is we got blown away by the tremendous colors of the winter version of the garden. So seed heads are here. I should have mentioned in August, seed heads are starting to form, which brings a whole nother group of birds and butterflies to actually eat the seeds. Specifically, kind of goldfinches were all over the place when it was about this color. So the goldfinch, I didn't capture any with a photograph, but the goldfinch, the color of the goldfinch was really tremendous in this chocolate brown and grays. So one of my favorite shots here of the mostly zinnias with the backdrop of the steel container there. So again, the strategy of this project was about taking something that is often dismissed as just, how do we extend blooms, and making it more spatial and immersing humans inside that so we can observe it a lot more carefully. I've learned so much about species and these particular species in this experiment, and I just long for other people to have that experience. And then lastly, we were able to just clip up, because they were annuals, clip the base of all the species and compost it all, and the party starts again the next year, over and over. So what was a really open ground plane that then became a really dense series of rooms becomes an open ground plane again. So we did this experiment for 3 years, and the first year that grid was tight. The second year the grid was fairly loose, and we were surprised to see where the pockets of concentration was kind of emerged from the previous years. You could see wind patterns starting to show up on the ground, and with these, the zinnia seeds are more gravity released seeds, so they were at the base, whereas their basil was in the mix that had a much smaller, thinner seed that was more wind dispersed. So you could start to also see where species were emerging and shifting, which was its own kind of wonderful experience. Yeah. So, and by the time the third year got around, it was a bit of the seeds that germinated on their own were much more healthy than the seeds that we placed in the ground at the 14-inch points. And so the whole, the kind of, the grid really disappeared during that year, which is, again, fascinating to see that experiment. So, so as you guys, so I'm going to try to like talk about this nuance of time, but then get it back to you guys, right? That what I'd love for you to what I'd love to challenge you with is for you to think about cyclical time. Several of you talked about parking as an example. You get cars coming in during the business hours, and then maybe the parking lots are really empty in the evenings. And so if you could start to draw and unpack the spatial potential of those cyclical changes, right? That's that seasonal thing. It's not just in the day, it's not just in a week, but also in the year of the season. So anyway, challenge drop to you there. All right, second one, regenerative time. Before we talk about regenerative time, I need to talk a bit about the Transformation Gardens as a project. This is also in Auburn. All of these projects are within 20 miles of Auburn University. We've kind of shifted to hyper-local. David mentioned, the good David mentioned a lot of work that we've done with dirt and work that's around, but HILLWORKS has been fairly local, focused on Alabama and Georgia, a little bit of Tennessee. But all three of these projects are right in the backyard, and they're more of our experimental projects. But right on Auburn's campus is this Auburn University is a land-grant institution. It has this rich history of land-based research, and through the last century, those really rich research moments continue to get pushed to the edge of campus over and over and over, and the core of campus is a bit more park it's more like modeled after a park. Oh, I got to back that up, right? But historically, there were peach orchards. This is one of the peach orchards. This photo's from 1910 that was right in the heart of campus. Some early maps of the university show look at the proportion between building and field or orchard or land-based. Just imagine kind of number of brick versus number of plant comparison on the campus. This is a tremendous amount of land being studied and just very few classrooms. So there's a lot of classrooms out there. This pink area is about a 16-acre piece of property that the old rotation, which is highlighted in pink, was initiated early. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but was initiated to study rotating plants that would allow the soils to be regenerated. So through the years, these land-based research plots, demonstration plots, teaching plots just continued to get dispersed and shifted, scattered. And so one of the goals of this project was to bring these demonstration opportunities to one space so that classrooms could come here and have, an orchard conversation right beside a conversation about corn, right beside a conversation about grafting, right? And it becomes more of a center. And it's for the actual students learning how to graft. It was also for fourth graders learning what land-based research is and a bit of understanding of how do we recruit people that are interested in horticulture in the future, right? And it's also got a little bit of original research embedded in here. So that's the Transformation Garden. This is the kind of latest site plan. Each of the circles with the letters in them represent a particular plot. So we've got orchard, vineyard, an actual an aquaponics system where the fish crew and the horticulture crew are partnering up and cycling water between the plants and the fish, which is pretty fascinating. And a children's garden we'll talk about. And each of these plots has a whole series of advocates or champions that we were working with to try to understand what the needs were for the class, what the goals were for the research, how protected the research is. So we were creating this overall agenda that started to really work with student learning, allowing students to see each of the maintenance regimes that had to happen on each of these plots, and they were participating in that. So you're understanding not just the life cycles of the plants, but the management regimes that are being applied to them, and the challenges that brings. And this project, again, 16 acres, it unfolded in a very opportunistic way, where we were trying to build some infrastructure in, like irrigation and circulation, but it was often faculty-led on which plots go first. And so you can start to see some of the tomatoes in the background, some of the rows of what will be strawberries in the foreground. This is a series of cotton and pea and corn experiments. This is what they call a vertical farm, which is essentially a hydroponic system, and lettuces are grown in a vertical rack, and water is circulated through that, and it's those lettuces are then feeding the dining halls. Again, research going on. And then part of it is the children's garden. I'm happy to say that the children's garden, which is in the south end of the project, just went out to bid, and the contract on August the 4th is the official, groundbreaking day for the children's garden. I'm pretty excited about that. Children's garden is really about getting kids in these immersive plant-focused spaces so that they can understand the magic and the glory of what plants offer. So you can see the labyrinth that's made out of nitrogen fixers, and the sumac gaggle, and the fragrant garden, and the shady grove. These are some images from just the proposals there. I won't get into too much of that detail, but what I really did want to talk about is this. This is a really complicated project that has a lot of timelines associated with it. And so this is a really kind of simplified approach to trying to understand phasing. We build the road first. We move a few active field plots second. We grow a new corn maze third. We shift the children's garden fourth, right? That's kind of an oversimplified version. But all the while, so I'm going to let this run for a little bit. One of the things that so that was the introduction to what the transformation garden is. Now I want to talk about is what the regenerative time is. So within all of that planning and focus and kind of opportunity searching, that takes time. As you guys know, you only have 2 weeks. It takes so much time to organize 30 faculty members. Faculty, we can all agree, are terrible to work with. Faculty are tough. We all know that. They have ideas that are terrible. And so one of the big opportunities of this project was that we had this kind of overarching agenda of creating a strategic plan for it, but we also wanted to hit the ground running, trying to remediate this soil. So within the context of this project, as it's being developed, we're also learning from one of Auburn's best spots on campus, which is the old rotation. Anybody heard of the old rotation? All right, a few people. So the old rotation is one of the oldest, it is, I think, the oldest ongoing research projects on crop rotations in the U.S., founded in 1896 by Professor Duger, and he put these crops right beside each other. Each of those stripes of crops is 1 acre, 13 acres total. No, I'm sorry, 1 acre total, 13 plots, and one of them doesn't rotate any crops. It's just cotton year after year after year after year. The next one rotates cotton and legumes, or peas, right? And the next one does rye, cotton, and peas. And so it's trying to evaluate what are the impacts of rotating versus not rotating. And they found out through the last 100 years, I've got to unpack this diagram a little bit. So the X's on the bottom are non-rotating crops, and the vertical axis is yield. So as you continue to plant cotton over and over and over, the yield goes down. As you rotate with any other species, that you can continue, the yellow dots are rotating crops, and the yield is continually going up. The health of the soils are continuing to go up. So it's amazing what this, rotation, this regeneration is happening as you continue to build soils. So we were taking this huge, this is one of the legacies of Auburn University. Other universities have been working with us as well, but one of the legacies there at Auburn. And we really wanted to get that out front. And so we started advocating that we regenerate the soils of this larger 16-acre plot as we were also designing and making decisions about its future. So that there's at least two major projects running on at the same time. So as you can see, this is a couple of cover crop strategies where cover crops can start to regenerate the soil, build organic matter, fix nitrogen. There's one called the oilseed radish, which starts to break up compacted soils. So if you have a road bed or something, the radishes are like, there's one I remember seeing a cultivar that was called fracking radish, which is like fracking like a drill. So the radish was like that, driving that root down into the heavily compacted soils to break it up and add organic matter to it. So these cover crops are happening simultaneously as we're designing this project. So this is this photograph was taken a few years ago. We're still in the process of designing for the overall site. We're still trying to build some components of it. You can start to see, the main kind of pedestrian and work path that moves through the landscape. You see the old rotation here at the bottom of the image. You can start to see some of the other plots emerging, but the rest of the green are cover crops. And so it takes a tremendous amount of time to build up the soil. And I just commend the Department of Agriculture to see that there's an opportunity here within the project, within the timeline, to start to regenerate. So this is seed drilling some of the cover crops. These are cereal rye. So the cover crops, typically there's a winter crop and there's a summer crop, and sometimes there's three. So winter rye, you can start to see that, cereal rye, and then sun hemp. And the sun hemp is this incredible, it's in the Fabaceae family, which means it's fixing nitrogen. So it's taking nitrogen out of the air and putting it into the soil. And it's also this incredible spatial experience. As students move through this landscape, they can, they see the cereal rye that's about knee high, and they see the sun hemp that's about head high. So simultaneously, it's building a dialogue on campus about remediation, regeneration. So again, I guess I'll turn back to you guys. You guys are talking a lot about proposals, or you're starting to build a strategy for proposals in the future, but I'd encourage you to think about what are the opportunities, what are the temporary landscapes that can start to make the proposal closer, or what can you do that starts to build on the regenerative capacity of these long-term proposals that might take 20 years, but what can you do in 3 years, right? How can you really lean towards those temporary, impermanent kind of landscapes? All right. I really liked it when somebody asked a question. Anybody have any questions before I go on to the next one? Yeah. Yes, I mean, it's a great question. Simultaneously going on, there's a much less compacted soil. So we're looking south on this image. North is closer to the foreground, south is in the background. The further away from the camera you get, the more healthy soils you get. Also, your downhill, slightly wetter soils. A lot of storm water is moving down there. So we're really working. I'm going to move. This zone right here, some of the worst soils on campus. And so we're really trying to, we've been building, we have a really strong poultry science department. And so we just dropped like 8 truckloads of chicken litter out there, which smells wonderful. Smells like success. So we are actively trying to get that kind of management it's a bit more spot focused. And we also know that in the foreground we want that to be an orchard. And so the folks that are doing the orchards are trying to kind of dial in the best soils for that particular end use versus the children's garden that's all the way to the south. So yeah, that ongoing management is happening. Now, I think you mentioned as an example, weeding. There's no weeding happening. I mean, everything in this particular project is a bit. We're trying to minimize management, so you can start to see here. Look how clean that gravel road is. This is a really robust gravel road. We're trying not to pave, but the gravel's got to take a big beating. They've got huge tractors that are running over it quite a bit, but in this last image you can see, look at all the weeds on the right hand side of that kills me. I'm trying to get them out there to let's spray that at least, but they're not doing large scale sprays. It's really kind of spot touches, and they're happy with the way it looks. They're not doing that for me, despite my requests. So it's a different scale of management. It's more like a agrarian scale of management rather than a horticulture scale of management, which we're learning a lot about. Great question. All right, the third project and the third type of time that I want to talk about is story time. And we've talked about this a good bit today, that sites have history, and sites have this, whether the history is good history or not, it's still valuable history, right? And sites have, there's no such thing as a tabula rasa. Everything that you are proposing is being proposed within a context of history of a place and of a culture. And I would encourage you to be more robust about how you're engaging those histories. So this is a project that's really thinking about story time, really trying to expose the different uses of a place. HILLWORKS is, we're kind of fascinated with adaptive and creative reuse at all scales, kind of urban site scale, material just harvesting and reuse on site. So I'll talk about a residential project we call the Porch House that is happening in Opelika, Alabama. Opelika is a sister city to Auburn. It's just the city limits touch each other. But it's in this warehouse district. These were cotton warehouses. These large buildings are about 200 feet long, cotton warehouses that would historically hold cotton temporarily as it gets ready to be loaded on the rail line that's running at the bottom of the image. And Opelika exists in this location as that transition between agricultural land and rail line to get the goods to a broader audience. And so this, we were invited by the client, by the owner, to think about how to propose a residence within this context, quite industrial context. So you can start to see this is a Sanborn from 1949. The the cotton warehouses are to the right. The yellow is the site that we were inheriting. And in this image, you can see that it was auto sales and service. Pretty fascinating. It had auto service, car repair on the lower level, and a gas station, filling station on the lower level. And on the second floor, they were selling cars. So there was a big ramp that would get the car up onto the second floor, and quite robust structure to hold it up. And then and you could also see right before this, the previous, are y'all familiar with Sanborn maps? You guys? Yeah, okay, great. Fantastic. Love to see some more of those next time we're together. The Sanborn map prior to this, which I think was 1912 or 1914, this was a slaughterhouse, this yellow area. But none of I think all that was wood construction, and none of that none of that fabric was retained when they built the auto sales and service. And then you can start to see this. You see nope. This is the building. It's a two-story building right there. That's the building that we're working with. It's the full depth of the block at that point. And then it became the Opelika Auburn News, which is a print shop. You can start to see inside the building. So this was on these walls. You can start to see, like, it said something like, purchase the best lubricant when it was a auto sales, and then that became a print shop. And then eventually the print shop actually burned down, and all that remained were these brick walls. And then years later, the plants grew, the vegetation kind of took over, so many kind of the layers of history start to get worn out. This actually says all work strictly for cash is what that says. And then the bottom says save 15%. So that was back when it was a auto repair. And you can see these kind of like really ghostly images as you move through the space. Fantastic, mostly fantastic graffiti in the site, in the space. But this idea of like landing residents within this rich history was something we really got excited about. We didn't want this kind of quick removal, quick redo. We really wanted to build, just be another occupant in a long history of occupants of this place. And we will give it to the next occupant in some number of years. So quick proposal, this is the site was also, the building was also about, depending on where you're measuring, 8 feet lower than the city street level. So it was this kind of descended garden, and we tucked all the house to the right and had this garden to the left. We call this the porch house because the big roof cantilevers over that porch that runs the entire length of the house. There you can see it in section there. So really trying to build up the wild garden on the left and then create these layers of rooms on the right. So plans. Yeah.
On the street level, how tall is that garden wall?
Yeah, it's about 8 feet tall if you're on the street. And then when you get on the inside, it's about 15 to 16 feet tall. Yeah, same garden. So, and I'll show you a few of those. Yeah, so here it is. I'll go quickly through these. But we were trying our best to be proud of what we were building and build in a way that would last, so that the contributions of the residents could extend into the next history of the place and not just be removed too easily and quickly, but it will be another one of the contributions of the textures or surfaces of the place. So you can start to see this Shishugiban on the outside to really kind of have a stark contrast between the layered, rich we were trying our best to embrace the concrete block. I think the client was really excited about the brick, and you can be really romantic about brick, but it was a little harder of a sell to be romantic about the concrete block, but we were able to make a case that that was part of the palette. And so the left-hand side is all new CMU block that creates this entry sequence, but it's working with that material that's instead of trying to apologize for it. And you can start to see, come over here again, that same little graffiti face that looked actually like a lot like my grandfather, and I keep going back to, which is right there. I've got that's a close-up of it. That's my grandfather. It's not really my grandfather. There's the All Work Strictly Cash, which became the bedroom. So that was the backboard for the bed, which is great. And so trying to, you get it, you all get it. And then we're dropping trees in, trying to build the wild. So really clean lines from the left-hand side. The porch is this kind of hovering element. The really dark Shishugibon on the left, and the bright, brilliant light coming in on the right in the wild garden. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get most of the plants that were already there in the site. Probably 70% of them were invasives that were pretty rough, and so we decided to remove all of them, and then we were able to collect seeds from the good ones, and then planted actual potted plants in the garden, but then seeded some of the more pioneer species that are coming back. So there's you asked about this. That's the front, really kind of quiet front elevation. That's the front door, and then you enter into the garden from about a 4-foot elevated perspective, and then you drop down into the porch. And it was really critical for us. There's the kitchen with the existing plaster wall with my grandfather's face on it, which you can see right there in that right-hand side a little bit there. So that happened to work out just perfectly with the cabinets. And all of these spaces are none of the spaces are fully immersed in the kind of new enclosure of the house, and none of them are fully immersed in the existing context. It's all this dialogue between the refined proposition and the layered history there. So again, I guess my challenge to you guys would be to try to amplify the stories that you find and amplify the histories that you're working with, and contextualize your work with the place. And again, it doesn't mean that you're saying this history was a perfect history. We're not saying that, right? It does mean that it's an important history, and you can start to be much more curatorial about the history that you're working with. All right. That's my last slide. I look forward to conversations.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you to the other David and NC State for hi, I'm over here.
Okay.
Sorry. And thank you so much to NC State School of Architecture for sponsoring the lecture tonight. We'll open it up to any questions. Just raise your hand. I'll bring the mic over.
So I'm a big fan of Marion Weiss and Craig Dykers, and it's always fascinating to me to see work that blends, you can't tell whether it was landscape architecture or architecture. You were presenting work that's more in the research realm, but early on I was unaware that you were actually an architect at the same time. So can you talk about how architecture influences your landscape architecture, or vice versa, and what that means for you?
Yeah, it's great. It's something I'm still struggling with, I think, because both disciplines have plenty to demand of your mind. And I'll say I'm not a good. I think it's overwhelming, honestly, to try to be a decent version of both at the same time. And so we've had to we tried our hand. We as at HILLWORKS tried our hand at a brewery design in Alabama and got completely overwhelmed by all the stuff. So I think there's some incredible complexity in each of the disciplines. We're a lot more drawn to working with living systems in the landscape, and we're drawn to the idea that you're possibly catalyzing an ecology, but you're not finishing it. And there's an openness that you have to approach your work with. Whether you like it or not, things might die. Other things are going to emerge. And in landscape, that's actually not a negative thing. That's something that you should be able to account for in a way that is somewhat forgiving and intentional and resilient. I love that side of landscape. I think there are fantastic architects that are using that kind of lens in architecture as well. So that, personally, just to be really transparent about it, I grew up in a plant nursery, wanted to get away from that world as much as possible, so went into architecture. And then the more I got into architecture, the more I was like, God, these plants are pretty cool. I don't know. And I find myself just being just overwhelmed and taken by I encourage you all to read the book Light Eaters. Anybody familiar with this book? Holy shnikes. It's a Zoe, I forget her last name. Zoe wrote it just like a few years ago, and it's talking about, the whole book's about plant intelligence. How do plants grow towards light? How do plants grow towards moisture? How do plants feel their way around soils? And it's fascinating. It's not trying to say that plants have a central brain in any way, but it's unpacking the wild world of plants, and to me it's been eye-opening and fascinating. I encourage you all to check that out, and I think there's in our particular context right now in the U.S., in the world, in what we're in, there's some more room to be in awe and in wonder of planted form and plant world. So anyway, that's my shtick. I think architecture, I learned a lot about, those architecture faculty that would just take your model and turn it upside down and say, oh, there's your project. Y'all have had those? Yeah. Who's over it, right? I mean, come on. But that idea of being able to completely rethink what you had built your entire assumption on and just like flip it over and see something in a new way. I think I learned so much about how architects see the world and are able to just like in a drop of a hat completely change the way they see the world. And I think that's to me that's something that the discipline of architecture doesn't take enough credit for that capacity to be able to just like try something and try something else and try something else and like not be all begrudging to just one idea. So I think those two disciplines really, they're both complex, they're both powerful, and they build on one another in ways that I'd never imagined. Yeah.
Great school there. But in 2 minutes, I know this is not your area, but would you comment on Rural Studio? Because I think it has such a rich legacy, and it's an interesting model for architectural students to learn.
Yeah. I mean, I would just say overrated. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Rural Studio is a fantastic program. If you're not familiar with it, it is allowing students to really kind of tangibly experiment with materials at full scale, one-to-one scale. And it's an incredibly immersive experience. So students live in Hale County, Alabama, and typically are there for, depending on the year, third year currently go for a year, and they build a house that's already kind of been orchestrated, designed by the Porch House team, which is an ongoing research project that's continuing to build houses throughout the area. And then the fifth year students come in and typically are there for 2 to 3 years and build these incredible projects. And I can't say enough about how powerful that program is. I'm a Georgia Tech grad, but have always been jealous of Auburn's program. I will say in the landscape architecture program, so one thing about Rural Studios, they're very project centric, and by that I mean they spend a lot of time building one project. They hand that project over and they move on to another project. They hand that project over, move on to another project. The landscape architecture program is, we're working on we've initiated a design build program as well, but it's more management centric. So instead of designing an intervention and moving on and designing another intervention, it's more of if you imagine the world as a garden, and we're cultivating something, and we're going to manage that over time and continue to cultivate that same space through time. We're working in Montgomery, Alabama right now at a 250-acre piece of property. It's a wetland that the city has agreed to make it a public nature preserve, and it's incredible old wood forest, and we're able to create maintenance regimes in these different plant communities and make the ecologies more rich. So I'm really excited about that. It's kind of a partner, Rural Studios doing the more project-centric focus, and we're doing the more management-centric focus. And I think those in dialogue have been really fantastic. It's been a good discussion there. Yeah.
So, Loacapoca, I don't know if I pronounced it right.
No, not even
not
close.
Even close?
Yeah, not
Perfect.
even close. Loachapoca, yeah.
Is kind of an abnormal place to start a cutting-edge landscape architecture practice. You've really kind of emphasized the importance of practicing locally.
Yeah.
So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about finding opportunity in where you are, wherever that is, and the kind of attitude or process or investigation or optimism or shaving of biases that's required to practice in that way.
I love that question. Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, so for those of you who don't know, Loachapoca is why would you know? Loachapoca is a small town, about I think 600 people. It's in Lee County. It's about 10 miles west of Auburn, the city of Auburn. Also, Auburn is a city and the university. And it's a fantastic stop on the rail as well. Another moment where field goods were delivered to the rail and moved further afield. But its downtown consists of 2 buildings. And there was essentially in 1920, the son of the kind of general store decided to compete with his dad and built another store, like a feed and seed shop, that's just outside of the city limits. So it's literally one parcel away from the city limits of Loachapoca. And we're renovating that building. It's an 8,000 square foot building to be our office. We're taking about 1,000 square feet, and the rest, if you're looking for space, come talk to us. And I just love town of Lochapoka. It's wild. People fly by on four-wheelers, like really fast on four-wheelers on a state highway, which is crazy. But we love the communal nature of the town. Everybody knows everybody else's business. And it's just got a beautiful agrarian history. They also do this thing called Syrup Sop every year, which brings about 10,000 people to town, and they make cane syrup, and they kind of show and demonstrate how historically you would boil the turpentine. I mean the cane, sugar cane, to make cane syrup. So yeah, fascinating. So we're really interested in working in Opelika, Lochapoka. We'd like to, like projects take a shit ton of money to build, as y'all know, and it's discouraging that you could only have an impact if you believe in that cycle, that you could only have an impact if someone who's got the means to build something asks you to build it, right? And so I think moving to Lochapoka is our hope that we can start to rethink the financial structure of design and the financial structure of research and the financial structure of how questions get explored. And I'm not at all saying that's working at all, but that's our hope. Yeah. Good question. I feel like I rambled on that one, and I would totally be open to other follow-up questions.
We've got one over here.
Yeah.
Good evening. It's another amazing day in paradise. My name is Mama Kai. I am just a wannabe architect. Like, that was my dream 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Wait, how old am I? Never mind. But I have the most important job in the world, and that's of being a mom. And so I've really appreciated just like how you've taken and put a different spin on things. Like one of the things when you talked about in the first segment about your favorite picture and how you talked about the chocolate colored plants where other people would be like, those are dead flowers. I don't know what he's talking about, you know, against the steel backdrop. I was like, that's so fascinating because nature is like, it's vibrant with the colors all year round, if we can look at it that way. And then in the second, which I actually want to focus on is the children's garden, which is like so fascinating for me. And then what I appreciated about this is taking what's there and celebrating it. Because right now I feel like Raleigh is going through an identity crisis with so many people moving from so many different places and tearing down what was there and building something totally different. And so it's a little bit heartbreaking to me. So I really appreciated that. But I want to go back to how that project for the children's garden came to pass, because the one thing that we can count on is that there will be more children in the world, and that anybody who's here is designing for children in mind, because they're going to be adults at some point, you know. And so I'm looking for our world to be more child friendly. So I really appreciate that. So if you would speak to how that project came to pass, I would appreciate it.
It's a great vision by some really brilliant people at the university. It was funded by Burpee Plants. Burpee Plants, which is are y'all familiar with Burpee Plants? You see it, they're everywhere, like in Lowe's and Home Depot, Walmart. You know, that they do a lot of tomatoes and basil and oregano, that kind of thing. They're cranking out the capacity for people to have vegetable gardens in their own backyard. Really great organization. They donated funds for a children's garden, and they cast the vision that children should be engaged early. And they were working with people in the College of agronomics and the horticulture crew to try to recruit students to the university interested in plants in some capacity. And so we got really fascinated by it because children still have a sense of wonder, and they have this kind of awe, and they can get taken by things that adults would dismiss too quickly. So I can't take any claim for the vision that it took the client team to establish that as a program and a goal. I'm not taking claim for that. That was fantastic, really brilliant. But we got pumped up when we were invited to design or think through what a garden focused on children could be. And we've been really careful. It started out as a playground. And we've been really careful and strategic about shifting the focus off equipment and onto immersive spaces that were about plant forward experiences and hopefully bug forward experiences. I didn't mention it. I threw up a slide of we were able to introduce the idea of a frog pond in the space. And it sounds so cool, right? But all it is like a water fountain that's big enough that has like wildlife living in it, no filter. We don't really know what that's going to look like in a few years, but we're hopeful that we can figure it out at the university level. But the frog pond, I'm going to fly back to that one. But the frog pond, to me, is another one of those moments where children can get their hands in water. They can watch the dragonfly land on a lily pad. There we go. Lizards and frogs could be moving around in this space. And it's made of stones that are all from the local quarry. We got a quarry just in town, basically. And so we're trying to find a like hyper local stone collection. So yeah, these kind of horticulture forward, really quirky immersive spaces, these thickets that are all about kind of ecological plant communities, the sumac thicket. We just think that the more it goes back to the seasonal time thing, the more people can get immersed in plant focused spaces, I think the more they'll be empathetic to the future of plants, which will likely help us. Yeah.
Oh. Howdy, I was curious about on your last project, interrogating the site itself. This was a plot that had formerly been a car factory, then had been a printing press, and then had been burnt down. How do you decide what gets to stay and what doesn't? In that final clip you had, some of the openings were bricked back up, it seemed like. Obviously you kept your grandfather's face as that needed to stay there.
Yeah.
But how did your team decide what actually got to stay and what had to be removed?
Yeah. I mean, there were some phallic symbols. We took those away, as you can imagine. Yeah, in graffiti. I think that's where design really. It was a series of small scale decisions. Towards the end, at the very beginning, it wasn't clear whether we were taking the building down. That we weren't asked to work within that building frame. We were asked to build a house, and I think if we would have come and said let's take this building away and let's build a 4-story building right here, I think that would have been financially probably more lucrative. So there was a lot of our work is trying to focus on getting the most out of what you have, and it's a little bit about how do we take advantage of maximum take advantage of what you have, and have the smallest amount of footprint as possible. So in that instance, we were really trying to make a case that there was so much, so the palette of materials were so rich that you couldn't replicate that. So let's work with that. So that kind of solidified the first scheme that we were going to occupy that site inside the wall. So that was a big kind of win for the project, in our opinion. And then our first 3 or 4 schemes was a residence that actually floated out in the middle of the space, and each of the rooms framed a different part of the walls on all 4 sides. And to be quite blunt with you, it was super expensive because you had just so much exterior envelope, a lot. And so it was, I think, a sobering financial decision to shift the entire house, cram it up against that eastern wall as much as possible, and minimize that envelope and use that existing eastern wall as a thermal break. It was a 18-inch thick wall, which is also a resource, you know. Yeah. So and then once that decision was made, we essentially worked with the contractors to try to. There were places we needed to kind of secure the material so that it wouldn't be falling continually. It wouldn't be unsafe, but mostly we're just trying to take advantage of the surfaces that you had. I didn't mention it. You can always also see if I have one. I told you earlier it was a 2-story building, and you can kind of see here the stairway. You see right there, like the stair to go up to the second floor was up against that building, up against that wall. You could read it in kind of like a weird shade of black paint. And so that was really fantastic. That was a discovery. Nobody knew that until we were probably 80% done with construction, and then we realized that. And so that was one of those things. We shifted things around to make sure that particular plaster component was exposed. Yeah. So and which was also a thermal, like we had to really work on energy modeling to make sure that thermal mass was sufficient, and there were fire concerns, but luckily this owner owned the other side of that building as well, so we were able to work through that. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. My name is Andrea Padilla, and I studied agroecology here at NC State. So I really appreciated your talk today. I'm currently in the Masters of Landscape Architecture program, and I'm really hungry to tie in the history and palimpsest of landscapes, especially rural landscapes, and looking at the history of agriculture and tying that into current designs in cities like Raleigh. So how could we as landscape architects start to tie in that agricultural narrative and keep that history of agricultural practices within landscapes in urban settings like Raleigh, North Carolina?
Yeah, I mean, it's great pursuit. Keep it up. It's really great. I would just, to me, one thing that we really advocate for at Auburn is to understand and advocate for a working landscape. And all of these urban centers need so much of the rural landscape to actually survive and to have food and have air that's clean, and the concentration of certain types of development really depends on the hinterlands. And so I would encourage you to continue not to think about the agricultural as a purely romantic history, but as a future of reality of to allow the urban centers to continue to thrive and continue to improve. They demand functioning, wonderful, living, rural, working agricultural landscape, right? And I think it's tough to make the sell purely on kind of the history and you get into things. Are y'all familiar with Serenbe around Atlanta? It's like a new ruralists kind of development where it's a kind of a houses around a horse farm or kind of that kind of. I'm dismissing it. It's not. It's better than what I've just described, but it is quite romantic. It's about trying to. It's this kind of backwards facing instead of forward facing, and I think that doesn't have a lot of potential and power. But the more forward facing you can build your work, I think the better off it'll be. Does that make sense? Maybe. Yeah, maybe not. That didn't make any sense.
We have time for one more question. I'm coming over. You're going to get it anyway. It's for the live stream.
I was just curious if you have any photos of the exterior of this property, and is it still industrial or is it commercial, or are these people just living in the middle of nowhere, or is it a kind of a secret that there's this beautiful house behind these walls?
It's a complete secret in that at some point, so you can see we didn't put the cinder block in the windows, but that same wall is this wall. So before we inherited this project, they had cinder blocked the interior and then re-bricked the entire exterior. So it's a really kind of banal brick wall on the outside and fantastic surfaces on the inside, but that is essentially what you see. We've got this really kind of minor, modest doorway, and then you enter a kind of a complete surprising wild garden. To the right of this building is a brewery that has a kind of a exterior shaded space for music venues, for music. This is kind of loud. The owner of this district, one person owns probably a block and a half, and they've been trying to build a culture of makers in the area. So you've got a person who does leather work, a person who does coffee, a record store, which is awesome, and a brewery and a distillery, all in the same district. And not many people know that there's a house tucked away in the back of it, but it's really great spot to go spend time. Yeah.
So you mentioned understanding like the maintenance regimes for these living systems that you're working with. Have you found that bringing that understanding to meetings with your client has allowed you to include more landscape program in projects where budget is a constraint or it's a publicly funded project?
Yeah, I think we've been a little more sober about at the beginning of projects. We've to be quite transparent with you, we've lost some really good landscapes to very poor management. They're completely garbage landscapes now. We designed them and they're terrible. And we've lost at least 3 native meadows that we've installed. We're super excited about the native meadow. We do a lot of native meadow research at Auburn. I didn't talk much about that at all, but there's at least 3 that are heavy on my heart that the client ended up just mow it. It's the same species there, but they just mow it every 2 weeks instead of letting anything happen. And so we've learned from those experiences to be a bit more aggressive at early meetings with clients in the conceptual phase, so that we are clear what it takes to do. I would say that it might be less maintenance to have a native meadow as an example, but it is in fact harder to find the people that know what to do in that instance, and it's very easy to find someone who knows how to cut grass. And so it's terrible that we're just constantly building the lawn management side of things as a culture in the U.S., but that is the cheapest and easiest management regime that's out there. Even ones that are less input and less infrastructure just don't have they're not as common. So that's been a big hurdle. We've been trying to build up, one of our goals for our meadow work is to build a team of people who know how to manage that, as well as people, like you can get a high schooler to cut the grass, and that's, we should be able to do that in a meadow. Get a high schooler to burn a meadow. I mean, why not, right? So that's our goal. But yeah, I'd say we work really hard to try to manage expectations really early, and then we have learned not to if a client tells us early on, we're just not going to do that, we don't then still build a project that demands that management, right? We change. I'd say probably early in my career, I might continue to build a project and say, oh, we'll convince them later, and we've had too many projects fail because of that. So it's embarrassing to say that, but that is probably what we did for 3 or 4 of them, and in the hopes that it would all work out, and it has not. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Let's give David another round of applause. We'll be back here tomorrow night with Emily and Mary from Assemble Studio based in London. And then on Friday, we have Jermaine Barnes from Miami. We'll also have House of Swank here, live screen printing our Real Matter 25 t-shirts. And then an NC NOMA reception with food from Mark Russell. Thanks for coming.